Arnie Gunderson, who is with Fairwind Associates, lives up in the Burlington area, and is kind enough to join us on a somewhat regular basis to talk about nuclear issues. Arnie is a nuclear engineer and really has been the go-to guy worldwide on the whole Fukushima disaster in Japan, where you'll recall there are a number of nuclear facilities there greatly affected, is an understatement, by the earthquake and then the tsunami that followed it. Arnie, thank you for joining us. How are you this morning?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm fine.
I know you've actually been over there in that part of the world visiting. Maybe we can kind of cut to the chase here, because one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is that this story seems to basically dropped out of the news, but it is it as bad, worse, or better than it was when the disaster happened?
You know, it's like one of those Chucky movies where you think you kill it and it keeps popping its head up. But you know, the decay products take years to completely cool down. But you know, we're 200 days into a year and a month into the accident. So most of the heat has decayed away. There's still, you know, thousands and thousands of horsepower, but in comparison to right before the accident, the heat is decayed away. You'll still see them steaming, but nowhere near as much as they were during the accident. So that part's the good news. But what's got the world in an uproar right now is the spent fuel pool at Unit 4 has an enormous amount of fuel in it, including the guts from the reactor. So there's no fuel in the nuclear reactor. It's all out in the pool. And this Mark I design has no roof over it. You know, it's been exploded away. And the fear is that if there's an earthquake, which I guess they get those in Japan, I've heard that. If there's an earthquake, the pool may crack and drain, at which point the fuel is still hot enough to burn. And, you know, there's still a possibility of having to evacuate Tokyo as a result. So if there's no earthquake, I mean, you know, pray for something. Pray for no earthquake, and pray that they rapidly defuel that fuel pool.
Is it what you call the situation today stabilized in any way?
You know, there's a comment. In engineering, there's static equilibrium. And if you put a ball bearing in the bottom of a cup and roll it always rolls back to the center. That's stable in my mind. If you put a ball bearing exactly on the top of a cup, it'll balance there until something comes and it'll roll off, and that's called dynamic. And so I think it's more dynamic. You know, if there's no earthquakes, it will you know, gradually cool down and gradually get under control. The big question is, you know, is there another big one lurking?
Uh-huh. Are the radiation levels in that the close proximity to the plant, have they dissipated?
Well, the radiation levels in the plant are astronomical. I mean, I've never seen anything like it in my professional career. In Unit 2, that's the one that looks like it's intact, but in fact it melted down as well. They were able to get a probe inside into the containment, and the radiation levels were 7,000 R an hour. 1,000 R an hour kills you, so it's you know, 7 times lethal concentrations. And it's so radioactive that it actually interferes with the circuits on robots. So no one really knows how you know, the cleanup is going to proceed, because the radiation levels are so high that a person can't do it, and they're also so high that a robot can't do it. So it's going to be a long slog before they decontaminate those units.
Would you describe that as the biggest problem, quote unquote, there today?
It's the biggest problem is money. They really need about $500 billion to clean up the units and dismantle them, and also clean up an area the size of Connecticut. They need to take about 2 inches of soil throughout the entire prefecture. That's a state, and the state is roughly the size of Connecticut. So that's a lot of real estate, and the numbers I'm seeing are somewhere between $400 and $600 billion that are going to have to come out of the Japanese, you know, through taxes and rate increases to clean it up. And Tokyo Electric's not moving fast enough because they're cash strapped. You know, like we were talking about Unit 4, And Unit 4 has is precarious. And a year ago, I was saying on radio that the solution is to build a building around the building. Well, just last week they came up with that solution. So they basically lost a year. And I firmly am convinced that there's a lot of things they could be doing, but they simply can't afford it. And that's a sad situation to be in an emergency like this.
If you had to prioritize what you would do there, what would it be? Unit
4 fuel pool. Top priority, because the fuel is sitting out in the air. Now, this is identical to Vermont Yankee. They have the fuel pool. It's the same design, except the roof happens to be on it. But actually, Vermont Yankee's got 37 years of nuclear fuel in it, and this one only has 7. So, these fuel pools up high in general are a concern. They're solvable. They're solvable across the world. Dry cask storage solves it. Fukushima had fuel in dry casks, and they survived the tsunami and the earthquake just fine. So the solution is to get it out of the fuel pools and onto the ground just as quickly as possible.
All right, this may be a dumb question. Are none of these units are operational?
Right. They have. There's about 10 of them that are likely. Well, there's 6 of them that are definitely shut down forever, and likely another 4. There's Fukushima Daiichi, which is the one we always, when we call Fukushima, it's really Fukushima Daiichi. Fukushima is the prefecture, and Fukushima Daiichi is the unit. Prefecture is like a state. Like, instead of calling it Vermont, we call it Vermont Yankee. But then there's one only 6 miles away that was almost as damaged, Fukushima Daini, and it's down too. So they may have lost 10 of their 50 reactors to the tsunami permanently.
Why can't they can they take the fuel rods out of this exposed fuel pool and put them into dry cask storage, or is it just too hot to do that?
The heavy crane that's above the fuel pool was destroyed in the explosions, as was the little bit smaller crane that actually moves the fuel. Both those cranes were destroyed in the explosions. So, and structurally, then they have to remove the cranes and they have to build new rails for the cranes to move on. It's radioactive work. These guys are wearing the respirators and the big white suits and all that kind of stuff, but it's work that has to be done.
Huh. So it's doable, but it's just the enormity of the job is what's really keeping it from happening.
Yes, and the next fuel pool up, Unit 3, is similar. It's got about half the fuel in it that Unit 4 does. So as soon as they get Unit 4 done, they need to move on to Unit 3 and do it over again. Both of those structures were severely damaged by the explosions and the tsunami and the earthquake. So they're weakened, and the fear is that another earthquake could break them even further.
Okay, I know you're not an earthquake specialist here, but what kind of scale of an earthquake would be a problem here?
Anything exceeding a 7, and of course the earthquake that hit out in the Pacific was a 9, but by the time it got to the site, it was about a 7.9. So anything exceeding a 7 would worry me. And I tell my friends in Japan, if you feel the big one, check the radio and check the TV feeds to make sure that those units are still intact. There is serious talk in Japan about, what would we have to do if we had to evacuate Tokyo, 40 million people that are 150 miles away. It would be, it would destroy the country. I mean, basically, the fabric of the country would no longer be.
And how would you ever evacuate 40 million people?
That's a great question, and I don't have an answer.
Tell me where you visited.
I spent most of the time in Tokyo itself. I went to one of the nuclear plants there called Hamaoka, and they are very serious about taking the lessons learned from Fukushima, and they're not going to start that plant up until they've learned the lessons. They're building a tsunami wall that's 70 feet high and 6 feet across and 2 miles long. But they're also protecting the pumps, the water pumps along the river, along the ocean rather. And what they've learned is that they're talking about staging extra equipment on the hill and with bulldozers so that if there's another tsunami, they can push all the debris out of the way and bring down the extra equipment immediately. You know, there's a comment came out from the plant manager at Fukushima Daini, which is the one that's about 6 miles away from the accident. And he said, if we're lucky, it was because this accident happened on a Friday. If it had happened on a Saturday, instead of 1,000 people there would have been a couple hundred, and they wouldn't have had enough people to respond. So, you know, there are these little moments of luck in life in the middle of something that's catastrophic.
Did I understand you right? You said earlier that 10 out of the 50 nuclear power plants in the country are basically shut down?
Well, all of them, except for one, are shut down. The last one will shut down in about 4 days. They have 54, and the Japanese have a system where the state, the prefecture, has the right to allow the plant to start back up. And there's enough public pressure and enough scientific fear that when these units shut down to be refueled, the public is refusing to allow them to start back up, sort of like Vermont Yankee in reverse. And so of the 54, 10 are likely, between 10 and 15 are likely never going to start up. 2 or 3 have been discovered to be sitting right on earthquake cracks. And so in the review post-Fukushima, they're taking a hard look at whether or not some of these should be decommissioned immediately.
Okay, you say 10 to 15 are likely to be shut down. And there are how many shut down today?
53 are shut down of the 54. You know, the concern is that when they start bringing these things back online, it's likely that between 10 or 15 may never go back online. So out of the 54, perhaps 40 may go back online eventually.
Okay. I'm sorry to harp on this. 53 out of the 54 nuclear power plants in Japan are offline right now?
Yes.
How are they getting their power?
You know, they have a lot of ways of creating power. There's a lot of excess in the system. They are conserving, and they fired up some old units that had been mothballed, not some old nuclear units, but some old fossil units. So they have they've done a really good job at conserving, and then in addition, they've fired up some gas-fired generation that had been sitting idle.
Wow, I mean, that blows me away. That's just remarkable that they've been able to continue as a country with 53 out of 54 nuclear power plants not on.
Yeah, it's 35% of their power. So they've decided we can do without 35% of our power. You know, there's actually a precedent here in the United States that the city of Juneau, Alaska, had 3 power lines coming into it. And a couple of years ago, a landslide took out 1 power line. So essentially they lost 33% of their power. And life went on. They figured out ways to conserve and drop their electric use, and they got by on 2 out of the 3. So it is possible in extraordinary situations for people to do extraordinary things.
We're talking with Arnie Gunderson of Fairwind Associates. He's been following the Fukushima disaster. Let's go to Montpelier. Dave, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Good morning, Arnie. It's great to hear this program. It's really timely. And I got to say, the science and engineering cultures here are demonstrating what a mature culture looks like in action. What is not mature seems to me to be the political culture and the economic culture. So, Arnie, what, in your broad experience, would a mature political cultural response to Fukushima on a global and national scale look like? Would let's tie the BP Gulf disaster into this as well, or on a local scale, Irene. What does a mature political culture, how do they react to something like this?
Well, that's a great question. You know, if you look for examples, it's gone, the extreme is, of course, Germany is going to phase out all their nuclear plants in the next 10 years, and they're certainly a mature political culture. And then there's, the United States that is actually building 4 more plants in the southeast, even despite Fukushima. I think that the mature culture is what Chairman Yasko of the NRC is suggesting, and he's been outvoted on the commission. But his position is, if we're going to consider new nuclear power, let's hold up on licensing these new nukes until we've figured out all of the fallout from Fukushima, all of the mechanical problems that have to be fixed, and that's probably 3 years into the future. And he said similar things for license renewals as well. He suggested that rather than renew these licenses, let's just put them. Don't shut the plant down, but don't give them a 20-year buy. Let's hold those licenses until we can make sure that all the Fukushima mods are fit in. I think he's the adult in that organization, but the other commissioners have, which are much more pro-industry, have outvoted him 4-1.
Let me take a moment of your time to remind you about our friends at Jet Service Envelope. For outstanding local printing needs, we encourage you to call the folks at the Jet. You can reach them at 229-9335. Envelopes, letterhead, brochures, and much more. Any printing that you need to get done, posters, anything like that, make it all happen at Jet Service Envelope. Of course, they do have envelopes as well. You can reach them at 229-9335, and you'll find them on the web at jetservice-envelope.com. Let's head over to Barry. Mike, good morning.
Good morning. I don't know if I missed this, and I apologize, but I wondered if your guest could kind of give everybody a little bit of a feel, or how about what life is like for people, like kids and everybody, how and for what distances away, how it's affected people's lives, and for what distances. Okay,
good question. Thanks.
Yeah, Mike, that's a great question. The Japanese culture is one where there's an obedience to authority that would amaze an American. So when this accident happened, they all sort of did what the government said, despite the fact there were people like me saying, you should evacuate sooner and you should evacuate further out, especially women and children. But over the last year, that culture is breaking down, and especially with women and children. There's a split, a political split, as well as marital splits occurring between husbands and wives. There's women in Fukushima that are taking their kids and leaving. They actually call the term a Fukushima divorce, whereas the men will say, well, the government says it's okay and I'm going to stay. The women are picking up and leaving without their husbands. And in a culture that's very lockstep, it's extraordinary to see that happen. It's also having political ramifications on the national level. There was a hearing just recently, and an American journalist was covering it, and he was sitting next to a Japanese journalist, and the people were screaming at the presenters. And the Japanese journalist turned to the American and said, I can't believe this is Japan. He had never seen that happen before. So there's certainly a breakdown in the willingness to trust authority in Japan as a result of this. And that may have long-term political ramifications. They've already lost one prime minister, and the new prime minister is on shaky ground as a result, too. So it's very unstable.
And maybe I missed this, but we were talking earlier about this evacuation area. Are people allowed now back in or not?
They're bringing them back into zones that can be as high as 2 rem per year. And what that means is that the average nuclear worker gets half a rem, and almost every nuclear worker never gets more than 2 rem. So they're bringing people back in, large numbers of people back into areas where nuclear workers are essentially exposed on a routine basis. The difference is that nuclear workers get paid, and there's a risk reward, whereas the people moving back in are not. The other concern, though, if you look at that number, 2 rem, about 1 in 500 people per year will get a cancer at that level. per the Bureau report, biological effects of ionizing radiation. But for kids and for women, it's about 10 times worse, about 1 in 50 per year. So if you stay there 5 years, it's 1 out of every 10 kids or women would develop a cancer in their lifetime. So, because they blend it out over a large population, old guys like me are going to die of something else before the cancer ever hits. But the young and the women are particularly radiosensitive. And that's what's driving this political schism we see there, that the women and the kids are more concerned than are the men and the elder people. Did I answer that, Mike?
Yeah. Okay. Let's head to Greensboro next. David, good morning.
Good morning. I've been to Japan 9 times, Tokyo area principally. I wonder if the Tokyo residents know of the level of radiation they're living in, given your sample test results. I don't know if you've sent your test results to any media in Japan in an effective way, to the newspapers or perhaps to NHK television. So I'd like to hear about that. I'd like to know that the people understand what the crisis is ongoing, and that they really need to focus on cleaning up the fuel situation at Daiichi. Once again, International Monetary Fund, there should be an international monetary effort to assist the Japanese in cleaning up these plants, which could melt down further, given the dropping level of coolant at reactor number 2, for instance. And that radioactive cloud would affect us all.
Yeah, I had the same thought, too, when Arnie was talking about that $500 billion, that, perhaps we might be in all of this together. Hello?
There's actually a petition on the White House blog. If you go go up on over to the White House blog and look for Fukushima, there is a petition asking the United States to become more active, both financially and technically. And I think that's an important first step, is having a lot of citizens realize that we are all in this together. What the listener was saying is that when I was in Japan, I took samples. I had little sample bags. I took 5 samples from routine places: a crack in the pavement, kids' playground, some moss on the side of the road, the roof. The place I was at had a garden on the roof, and I took some samples from there. And then right across from the Supreme Court, and I brought them back to clear them through customs and sent them to a lab. And the concentration of radioactivity in those samples was high enough. Had it been in the United States, it would be nuclear waste. So, yet people are unaware that there are cracks in their pavement and their sidewalks are contaminated. The book I wrote in Japanese has been number 1 on the science section of the Japanese bestsellers. I mean, it's not even in the top 100 nationwide, but within people who read science material, it's been number 1 for 2 months now. And I think that that's an indication that serious people are serious within Japan. But again, you run into those cultural issues where it's very comforting to do what the government says and not really think for yourself.
Okay, David was asking too whether or not do you feel that this book sounds like where he was going, but do you feel that you've been effective in getting the information out to the Japanese media?
Actually, I have a long interview with Tokyo Broadcasting on Friday, so they clearly are interested. When I was there, I had 10 interviews over 5 days with the media. There is an interest in hearing from people other than Tokyo Electric and other than from their own government. There's a real lack of trust, and we have been told, Maggie and I have been told, that Fairwind's website fills that within Japan, and it seems to be the go-to site for people who want to find out about what's going on in their own country. We have translators that translate everything over to Japanese.
And the government has been open to letting that kind of thing happen?
We have not been censored. Japan is certainly different than China, but the new premier of Japan, when the accident happened, he was the economic minister, and there's emails from him 3 weeks after the accident saying, whatever happens, we cannot let this accident affect Tokyo Electric. So within the government, their emphasis has been on, first Tokyo Electric, second protecting the government, and if there's any extra goodwill left, they'll protect their people. But it's the pyramid is reversed from the way it should be.
Well, I would have loved to have been a fly in your luggage when you got to customs and they asked you if you had anything to declare. I definitely wasn't going to sneak it through, but they were they were great about it. I had to go into a separate room and they brought out their testing equipment, etc. But no, it was I felt it was very professionally handled. So they actually let you bring back in radioactive material.
Yes, I explained what it was, and I explained what I was doing with it. It was triply bagged in a bag inside a bag inside a bag. The quantity was on the several ounce level. I wasn't bringing back truckloads, but when you measure what's in that material, it turns out to be 7,000 clicks, 7,000 disintegrations every second. If it had been 2 pounds, it would be 7,000 clicks of a Geiger counter every second in that pile of dirt.
I mean, considering, the scrupulousness that customs has, and if you bring back plant seeds or something from another country, or a cutting from a tree from another country, they would take that away from you.
They wanted to know if I had been on a farm. They were terrified of mad cow. And I said, no, this came from downtown Tokyo, and that seemed to be their bigger concern was mad cow compared to radiation. So I'm glad I got the samples in, and we have a competent lab analysis now that shows it. One sample also picked up uranium, which was unique, and that needs more study. And the others contain cesium-134 or 137, which that's the signature of Fukushima. This isn't bomb waste. This isn't just cesium-137. When you see the two together, you know it came from Fukushima.
So bottom line here, Arnie, is your biggest worry is another earthquake.
You got it.
Okay. Hey, thanks for your time this morning. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Send our best to your better half.
Okay, bye-bye.
Arnie Gunderson is with Fairwind Associates, and they operate out of Burlington. You heard him mention, I mean, he's... this is not somebody who's the interest in what he's doing is confined to the state of Vermont. I mean, worldwide, he's getting interest on this subject. Amazing. Wow. I'm just still kind of stunned on a couple of different levels here. That whole idea that 53 out of the 54 nuclear power plants shut down, and through conservation and firing up other, coal burning and other fossil fuel plants, that they're able to somehow keep the lights on. Wow, that's remarkable just in and of itself.